Today I will explain all of Belarus's history in order to show you how pathetic it truly is. Hey Slavic Vikings, and welcome to the pathetic history of Belarus. But what do I mean by pathetic? Doesn't that have a negative connotation behind it? Well, let me read the definition from Google. Arousing in pity, especially through vulnerability or sadness. So according to this definition, I truly believe that the history of Belarus could be considered pathetic. So this video will be somewhat of an exaggerated satirical criticism of the history of Belarus, so remember not to take it too seriously. If I missed any important aspects of Belarus's history, please let me know in the comments, and let's get on with the video. After the fall of the Roman Empire, many states around Europe started to be formed, like Denmark, Sweden, France, and even states in Germany. But the Slavs were always behind on this nation state, not even nation state, just any sort of organized state. Instead, the Slavic lands, for much more of hundreds of years than other states in Europe, were just unorganized tribes, as you can see on this map here. But around the 10th century, Slavs around Europe started to get the memo and form these states, with the formation of Poland, for example, in 966, which is a date we all have to learn in Poland, and the Kievan Rus. But the Kievan Rus were a bit different, because the Kievan Rus were originally Vikings from Scandinavia, I believe mostly Sweden though. So these Vikings would swim down the major rivers in Russia, mostly for trade and pillaging, but then some of them would stay there. And those were the Kievan Rus. That's why Ukrainians can be seen with more blonde hair or blue eyes compared to its neighbors, like Poland. Although Poland also had Viking settlers, just not as many. So the first pathetic history of Belarus is one under the control of another faraway city of Kiev. Not a good start for our little country, but let's see, maybe it gets better. However, it immediately got worse for Belarus, since Genghis Khan with the Mongol Empire, the biggest empire in history, came and totally devastated the lands of Belarus. The Mongol Empire never took prisoners of war, and they would burn villages and have no value of human life. They would just kill everyone, and this savagery was actually part of their tactics. So basically the first major conflict in Belarus's history ended up in a huge disaster that slowly resulted in the tiny Baltic country of Lithuania to slowly conquer the Mongol lands, to have this huge amount of land spanning all of Belarus, parts of Russia and Ukraine. So let's summarize a bit. First, Belarus's lands were occupied by small Slavic tribes, then the Kievan Rus took over it, and then the Mongols took over the Kievan Rus, resulting in the Mongols having control over Belarus. And then Lithuania, the tiny country which nowadays has under 3 million people, took control of the Belarusian lands. But what did this mean to Belarus? Well, first of all, the rise of feudalism. During this period, land was granted to nobles or boyars in exchange for military service. This also caused a huge rise of serfdom in this region, with workers basically being treated as slaves and their rights deteriorating a lot throughout these decades. The conditions of these serfs from Belarus were extremely bad, even compared to other states in Europe, which says a lot, trust me. So Lithuania has been in a strong military alliance for a long time with Poland already, for a couple decades, when in 1569 they formed the official Commonwealth of Lithuania and Poland. So Poland and Lithuania united, but in practice this meant that Poland had a much bigger influence in the Commonwealth, which resulted in Poland also having much more influence and control over the lands of Belarus. Interestingly enough, this huge commonwealth, which spanned many modern countries, also went into a union with Sweden during this time, for a short period of time to be fair, but I plan on making a video on that topic, so like and subscribe if you want to see that. Moving on, this period was the true start of the Belarusian national consciousness, mostly due to it was the only majority Orthodox place in the Commonwealth, in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So let's see how this new national movement goes for them. So Belarus basically becomes a colony of Poland. The Belarusian language is very suppressed by Poland through a process called Polonization. Orthodox Christianity, which was the defining feature of Belarus's national identity, also started dying out during the later years of the Commonwealth due to Polonization. So this period also was pretty pathetic for Belarus, but maybe it will get better. Well, it didn't, because Russia finally recovered from the Mongols, and the 3 partitions of the Commonwealth led to Belarus being absorbed into the Russian Empire. It's hard to believe, but things for poor old Belarus got even worse under the Russian Empire. The new overlord of the Russian Empire changed a lot for the people of Belarus. First of all, while in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the lands of Belarus were seeing at least a little bit of development, Belarus was specifically not developed at all during the Russian Empire, and it remained a predominantly rural and agrarian region. Remember when I talked about the serfdom here? Well, the serfdom and the rights of serfs during this period in the Russian Empire got even worse than they were before. So because of the engagement of Poland in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the lands of Belarus where they suppressed the Orthodox Church, Belarus had a substantial Christian majority at this point. So once again, because of this, Belarus experienced more religious discrimination, just this time on the other way around, since Catholicism was suppressed instead of the majority in Russia, Orthodox Christianity. Around the 19th century, the Russian Empire was in its peak state of worldwide power. So things were looking up for Belarus actually, for the first time. Industrialization begins in Belarus, urbanization increases, and there is a revival of the Belarusian national movement. So everything is going well. Maybe this is the time Belarus will finally achieve independence. So out of nowhere, in 1863, the uprising against Russian rule led by the Polish started and engulfed the Russian Empire. If this uprising succeeded, Belarus maybe would have gotten its independence, so the Belarusian people fought very hard. However, the uprising sadly didn't succeed. In the aftermath of the uprising, the Russian authorities implemented even stricter controls on cultural and educational institutions to prevent the spread of nationalistic ideas. Another consequence of the uprising was that many participants of the uprising had their lands confiscated and numerous individuals were sent to the gulags in Siberia, weakening the national movement even more and leading to widespread fear and despair. That's not enough of a punishment for poor old Belarus, since the Russian government intensified efforts to assimilate the Belarusian population by enforcing the use of the Russian language and limiting the use of Belarusian language in public life. But hey, at least things can't get any worse, right? World War I. Belarus, situated on the Eastern Front, saw intense battles between the Russians and the German armies. This led to widespread destruction of infrastructure, homes, and agricultural land. The fact that the war was fought on large part on Belarusian territory is something very much repeated in Belarusian history, since countries like Poland or Belgium, and also Belarus, are often the battlegrounds of Europe. So a bunch of Belarusians suffered greatly or died in this war, but hey, Despite all of this, maybe as a result of the war, Belarus would finally get its independence. So after the 4-year World War I, Russia was in a devastating civil war against the communists, and Belarus decided to seize the moment. They did this by declaring the Belarusian People's Republic on March 25th, 1918. Interestingly enough, the flag of this country, the white, red, white flag, is nowadays used for the democratic movement in Belarus, probably because the aforementioned newly created country was heavily Western and democratically aligned. So as a result of World War I and the devastating wars that followed, Belarus, next to its Slavic neighbor of Poland, finally got their independence. Just kidding, Belarus lost to Russia while Poland got to keep its independence. So the communists won the civil war and Belarus was now part of the USSR. It's worth mentioning that it lost like half of its territory to Poland, but at least maybe it will prosper in this new communist utopia. The 1930s were a time of severe political repression under Stalin's rule. Thousands of Belarusians, including intellectuals, political leaders and ordinary citizens, were executed or sent to labor camps in the Soviet gulags once again. And for the 1000th time, the Belarusian language was suppressed by the Russians. But more severely, the Soviet policy of collectivization aimed at consolidating individual landholding into large state-controlled farms led to widespread famine, suffering and resistance among the rural population. The Belarusian Holodomor, if you will, although still much less severe than the actual Holodomor in Ukraine. But then came World War II. I don't think I have to go deep into why World War II was an awful time for Belarus. It once again was the main battleground between Russia or the USSR and Germany. This led to huge losses of Belarusian people because so many of the fights were on Belarusian land, especially with the Nazis' scorched earth tactics during the Barbarossa operation. But at least after the war, things were looking up for Belarus, since rapid industrialization and reconstruction was funded by the USSR. And this in fact led to Belarus being one of the most prosperous Soviet republics. But then, as always, something bad had to happen to Belarus with the Chernobyl disaster. Despite Chernobyl happening in Ukraine, as you might have known from the recent news, around 2/3 of Belarusian territory was in significant contamination, which resulted in widespread panic and somewhat a lot of suffering. But then, in 1991, after hundreds of years of suppression, Belarus finally got its independence. Or did it? Belarus, after getting independence, was still largely economically dependent on Russia. But this was fine, at least it can flourish as a free democratic state and slowly gain its independence from Russia, right? Then came Lukashenko. Lukashenko's rise to power in 1994 had huge consequences to the modern state of Russia. He is the self-proclaimed last dictator of Europe, and he is still in power to this day. This has resulted in many people fleeing from Belarus to, for example, my country of Poland, where many Uber drivers are, for example, from Belarus, and when you talk to them, they're actually not allowed to re-enter the country over fear of being imprisoned, as consequence, for example, for being in a protest or disagreeing openly with the government. It goes without saying that the 21st century for Belarus has been highlighted by political repression and lack of democratic freedoms, largely because of Lukashenko. The economic dependency on Russia hasn't really changed because Lukashenko openly teases constantly the renewal of the union between Russia and Belarus, and it looks like the only thing that's stopping this from happening is the public's huge support against such union happening. Now let's get into some very recent history. So as you definitely know, Ukraine was invaded a couple of years ago by Russia. But Belarus actually had a huge role in this military operation. So Belarus didn't actively join the war with its army, but instead it is just offering a lot of support to Russia by, for example, allowing Russian troops to cross into Ukrainian territory through Belarusian lands. This was the main motivation and plan behind the surprise attack on Kiev, since the city and capital of Ukraine, Kiev, is pretty close to the Belarusian border. However, as we know, the invasion of Ukraine failed, despite Belarus's support, and it has just resulted for Belarus in huge sanctions and even more condemnations for its practices. So then Lukashenko got mad and started the migrant crisis with the EU. In short, he took a bunch of immigrants from the Middle East, I believe mostly Iraq, sent them straight from Minsk to the borders of Lithuania, but mostly Poland, basically to flood the Schengen area with migrants. But Poland had a very harsh stance and militarized the border immediately and didn't let any immigrants in, which resulted in Lukashenko's plan to destabilize the European Union to fail. So that failed miserably. But hey, not everything is bad in Belarus. The IT sector is looking fine. Just a quick reminder, this video is mostly satirical and I'm exaggerating how pathetic Belarusian history actually is. The Belarusian people have actually shown a huge amount of resilience and perseverance throughout their history, and the fact that they're even somewhat independent nation nowadays is a showcase to that. I would highly appreciate feedback if you have any for this video, and I would even highlier appreciate if you subscribed and liked the video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, farewell, żegnam and goodbye.